It's that heart opening, that moment where we're not just doing spiritual practices, where we're not just learning, where that moment where we just know, where we know that we are absolutely and completely loved without any condition, without any judgment. We are 100% accepted for who we are right now, without having to change a thing. Just as we are, we're loved. It's an extraordinary experience, isn't it? That feeling. And it feels so good, and the joy. It's just not just love, it's joy. This lightness of being. Today we're talking about softening our hearts so we can be open and available to this love all of the time. We were in a lot of energy these last 2 weeks, and we recognize how much the youth have this energy. They're so free. They don't have that self-consciousness. They don't have those layers that they have developed over lifetimes to protect themselves. So there's a freedom, and that when we look at the indigenous tribes, which we're looking at this month, there's that freedom of lightness, of being. They know that they're safe. Their tribe are their people. Their tribe is their. They don't have a work life that's separate from their personal life. Their personal life is part of going out and hunting or gathering and creating. Everything is with their people. Their home, wherever they are. Their safest place is right where they are with all the people that we are. And that's living with this beautiful, soft heart. And in our wonderful modern, postmodern world, we've developed a lot of, we're living this, we don't live in little safe tribes. We live in this vast world of all sorts of cultures and different ways of being. And it doesn't always feel safe. And so we've developed, as we've grown in our awareness of ourselves, we've also grown sometimes in our protection of ourselves. And it's hard to feel safe sometimes, or we think it's hard to feel safe, to let our guards down, to let those walls of our heart dissolve, and to let this love open us, and to feel that deep love wherever we are throughout life. We all know about the fires up north and south. I've had friends who have lost their homes and in both places, and we've experienced it here. In Livermore, we had Thursday night, we were hazardous air quality in the 300s, where it's hazardous just to breathe. We realize how precious air is and how far away we are from the fires. Imagine what it's like to be from there. The CSL, the Centers for Spiritual Living in Paradise, was burned to the ground. The community, they have lost their homes, they've lost everything. And of course, in that tragedy, hearts are bursting open, and there's so much generosity and giving. A friend whose husband and daughter were buried in Paradise. The cemetery was burned. All the memories they had of their childhood, it was all burned. And she said she's crying for that, and at the same time her family escaped and are with her, and they're receiving so much help. They've lost everything. They don't even have clothes anymore, let alone food and anything. They have nothing. So people are coming with vans and giving, and she just said, I'm crying out of love. We're in the midst of this tragedy, the amount of love pouring in. And I know we all know these stories that we're reading about, the way people are reaching out in love. Tragedies, crisis, people talk about getting cancer, or it opens our hearts. We realize I can only go so far with my own self-will, self-control, and there gets to be a point where I'm limited. And that's when the surrender happens and the heart breaks open. And how many people have said a crisis was the greatest thing that ever happened to them because it opened up our hearts. It allowed us to feel this love that we weren't aware of because we were so in control, because we had our life under management. We're not worried about survival anymore, most of us. We have our homes, we have our cars, we have a basic life that we can feel safe with, a bed that we're going to go, food that we're going to eat. So we're not vulnerable as much. We've really protected ourselves from vulnerability. And what tragedy, crisis does is it makes us vulnerable again. It says, I don't have everything under control. I don't know how to fix this, whether it's a health condition, a financial condition, a job issue, a relationship issue, or what we're experiencing, our natural disasters, gun attacks. I mean, there's this feeling of being out of control we're experiencing in our country, which is leaving us vulnerable and our hearts open, a surrenderness. And it's beautiful. I just was reading a young man who was a nurse at the Paradise, one of the Paradise hospitals. He was leaving in his truck, And the fire was so strong, there's a picture, it's like right outside. You see his truck, it's burned, it's brown all on the side, and the headlights melted and the fenders melted. But when a bulldozer came, he was stuck in traffic, sort of clearing out cars, and he realized, I can't leave. He turned his car, went back to the hospital, and helped all the other nurses and doctors and first responders, bringing all the patients out. And they created a triage in the parking lot, taking care of all the patients until a way where the patients could be let out. And so they kept working and helping all the patients stay alive with their oxygen and everything else, got every single patient out safely while the fire is burning around them. You know, just stories like that. Just can't help. We touch our heart soften with the beauty of the Spirit. And I was sitting at Starbucks yesterday, and I was thinking, I was just writing, because the air quality here, I mean, I was just worried about the air quality here, and it's like that it's hazardous to even breathe. I mean, just realizing how valuable first responders are, that they are actually literally protecting us. And I thought, you know, if firefighters come through this door, I'm standing up and clapping. You know, just the gratitude and the joy of our common humanity. And that's that same connection that we start to feel our connection in crisis. We feel not separate from one another, but connected. So the question is, I think crisis will always happen as part of the human world, but how do we feel this connectedness without crisis? Can we feel this depth of love with everyone around us and a sense of belonging to each other, that we need each other without there being a crisis? And for the indigenous tribes, it was the sense that they felt, as I just was saying, deeply connected to everyone in their tribe. Everyone was related. And if you were here the first service of November, we were talking how everything is energy, that there was no separation, there wasn't the sacred and the profane. Everything was energy. Objects was energy. The wall, the trees is pure energy. These are man-made energy, but behind even the man-madeness is the energy behind the materials behind. So you just keep taking it back to source. It's energy. Everything is energy. And it's not that it's just energy. In the indigenous tribes, they were in relation to everything. It wasn't just, oh, I'm in this vast energy surrounding and folding me like this abstract thought. They were in conversation. They were in communion with everything around them, with each other. Every person had a specific connection with a role that they played in their life. And even after they died, this is a connection that lasts forever. It's not something that's just temporary. It's not a person just passing your existence. I know now that we are in connection in some way, that this connection is eternal, that we are forever seeing each other. The plants and the animals, oh my goodness, you know, just what the first responders have to see. What was making me also think of the appreciation of first responders, I just read an article this morning about how they go through the same PTSD as veterans in war, and that they're seeing things that they don't talk about. And I was just thinking in Paradise, the bodies that still need to be found, the animals, and they have to see all these things, and we're going to hold them in prayer, because they just said that actually, because they don't talk about it and because they're having so much trauma, that the suicide rate on firefighters is actually higher than when they actually die fighting the fire, but it's really high because they're holding a lot of this pain inside of them, and so gratitude going towards them, but because we don't acknowledge it, but we actually do feel connected with everything. And I think to soften our hearts is to recognize that we are in this eternal connection, that everyone in this room, we are deeply connected. We may not see each other for a whole week or a month. We might just pass by each other. But for this moment, we are deeply connected. And when we have the eyes and the heart to see, our hearts start to soften, and we see and value one another. But there's another aspect of this connection, which is, as I said, we sometimes feel unsafe. How do I know I'm not going to be hurt by this other person? And they believed strongly, as is in loving all beings. So I was reading this morning about a hunter who was going after his prey. This is in the Kalahari tribe in Africa. But he feels completely connected with that. He doesn't feel like it's an enemy. It's something that we are connected. There's a divine thread, and if you have the eyes to see, so you could see the thread, and we're called to each other. This animal knows to come close to me, and I come to it. And in this process of giving life, God is there, and there's joy in it. There's joy in everything when we see the connection behind form. And so their entire life was in this dance of connection, even with what we call the enemy. And so even as we go through these crises, seeing that, as I know so many of you do, see the love, that there's something behind it that's coming, that's being birthed through it. But even in our everyday life, those people who are challenging to us, we want to protect ourselves. Years ago, I read a book called Undefended Love. And the book was only okay, but I loved the idea of it, which is, what would it be like to live with a heart that's undefended, that doesn't need to be protected from other people? What does that look like? And it seems to me the only way that can be is if we have a relationship with our divine self that we totally trust, that we can go to and be completely undefended, that I can know that all my weaknesses, I can own all my weaknesses. I can feel into my weaknesses, my flaws of character, things that I can improve and some that I can't. But either way, in this moment, they exist, and allow myself to feel into it. Because there is a truth that we are being judged, that people do judge us, and we judge other people. I remember someone saying, it's impossible for me not to judge. And wherever we are on that scale, it happens. And so we're not making this up. And so with that judgment, I look at how I want to be when people are judging me. How do I want to be with it? Do I want to attack back? Do I want to defend myself and say, no, and I did that because of this? And what I've really been working on is just taking time every day to be still with myself and take in judgments towards me and saying, what are true? What do I feel is true? What am I trying to protect myself from? And let myself feel that and allow it to go into my heart and feel the divine presence of love. Bradford Keeney, who wrote the book, The Bushman Way of Tracking God, which I've been enjoying so much this month, he talks about, he likes to shake things up, so he calls it a porn God. And he said it's a porn God, meaning it's not real, if this God isn't loving and all forgiving. And if the divine presence, if we can't feel completely naked and vulnerable in front of this divine presence, then it's not a real divine presence, a real God. And it's evoking this presence within us. Whether you call it your divine self, the I am presence, divine beloved, however we refer to it, it's me, Harriet, the one who's limited, going to that part that is unlimited and saying, I feel terrible for my limitations. I feel sad. When we do that on a regular basis, our hearts soften. And so what I'm learning is to do that on a regular basis, on a daily basis, to allow my heart, instead of protecting myself from judgments that are coming at me, allowing myself to feel them. Sometimes they're true, sometimes they're partial truth, and sometimes they're not true at all, but I don't need to protect myself from them. I let them in, and then when I go back out in the world, I can go back with a softer heart, with a heart that doesn't mean I don't stand up for myself, but I don't stand up for myself out of protection or out of defense or out of attack. I can just say what I know is true for me from a place of openness, there's a place of standing your truth with a shut down, closed heart, anger, separation, otherness. And there's a way for standing in your truth with your heart open but still standing strong. And so the idea of living with a soft heart, allowing the energy of pure spirit to move through us no matter what, allows us to stand our truth with an open heart and effortlessly. So that's so much what our journey is, I believe, is opening in that soft heart, this energy that we've been talking about these last 2 weeks isn't possible without the soft heart, without softening. And that also reminds me, one of the other aspects with the Kalahari tribe, with indigenous tribes in general, I've heard this about many tribes, is they're much more physical. They touch a lot more. They think it's funny when they learned about Reiki that you don't touch, and they say, well, why wouldn't you touch somebody? That's where you get all the energy. And they're always touching each other. And we raised Julian with attachment parenting, where we were holding him all the time, because I was learning this from the tribes, and I thought, well, I think they know what they're doing. So we held in that this idea of connection, just connecting deeply on every level, having a physical interaction. It's this wonderful touch where are we rigid when someone touches, or do we softly allow this light and this energy to move into us? So the way the Kalahari and these indigenous tribes is soft heart, this deep connection they feel with one another, this connection that isn't removed but very physical, very alive, and deeply connected. And interestingly, another way, and loving their enemies, and it also reminds me, Thanksgiving is coming up, which was about the Native Americans and the Europeans coming together at harvest time and celebrating. And there's all sorts of, they are enemies, and they ended up, I don't think any Native Americans or tribes in Africa knew how much the Europeans were going to just bring so much destruction to their life, their way of being, which is heart-wrenching. But in these moments, these two opposites came together to celebrate their oneness. It's a beautiful way of being, is to being able, in your stories, even in World War I, the stories of where the Germany and I think it was the British stopped fighting on Christmas and sang Silent Night back and forth to each other. And it was like for a minute they weren't enemies. Those moments where we know, for me, what I've learned is that people who are judging me are my greatest blessings because it does soften my heart. They invite me to soften my heart towards myself because it wouldn't upset me if I didn't think what they were judging me for was partially true. So they soften my heart. If only we get flattery, if only we get positive things, what can happen is we get prideful. We start to feel pretty good about ourselves, and that actually builds up a wall. When I start to feel really good about myself, there's some separation that happens. So this is the second way indigenous tribes like to bring. Bradford Kinney, by the way, has worked with many tribes. This particular book, he focuses primarily on the Kalahari tribe, but he's worked with many tribes all over the world. And he said the second primary way they like to connect is through teasing, by making fun of each other, by not taking yourselves too seriously. And that's the idea of pride. When we start to feel a little bit prideful, we don't take jokes too well. People sort of make fun of us, and we go, I don't like that. And it's not mean, but it's be able to lightly play with one another, to be silly with each other. And I think, especially on the spiritual journey, we really need to learn this play because we can take our spiritual lives so intensely seriously. I've heard twice now, I talked once with the director at assistant director at Valley Montessori School. This is years ago. It's a private school. Parents are given lots of money. And I said to her, man, these parents must be really intense to work with. And she said, oh, man, they're nothing compared to people at church. And then I was just talking to my friend from South Africa, and she was talking to someone who's working in the governmental system, and she was saying the same thing to him about, wow, this must be really difficult work you're doing. And saying, no, nothing compared to like the people at church. They're really intense. And I think why is because we have greater shoulds. Shoulds are what keep us. We have our sacred cows. And so what these indigenous tribes is make fun of our sacred cows, the things that we think really should be. When Reverend Mark Anthony Lord was here a year ago, he was talking about forgiveness. And he said the place where we don't want to forgive is that word unacceptable. And that word unacceptable happens in spiritual communities more than any other place because we'll forgive some people to be human and have faults in the government, or we'll have our judgments. But at church, our ideals are so high, our shoulds are so strong, these behaviors are so unacceptable that place of lightness of being isn't very light. And people get really harsh with themselves and with each other. So we want to learn, can we laugh at ourselves? I remember Reverend Edward Villieu, he's the minister at Santa Rosa, he sat down next to me and goes, all right, I'm going to change your whole life, Harriet. He said, are you ready for this? I don't know if you can handle it. And I said, okay, I'm ready. He goes, you have to tell your board this, and you have to tell your church this. I said, what? He said, I don't think you're ready. He kept putting it off. I said, all right, tell him this. It's just church. That's all it is. Let go. And it was like that moment of lightness of humor, of just being light with it and allowing ourselves to laugh at ourselves or willing to laugh at our shoulds. Do I have a should about how church should be, or it's unacceptable, and it's not really horrible things, but I mean, like, that person should be kind. We're at a church that preaches unconditional love, and they weren't kind to me. That's a should. And guess who you've just made miserable? Yourself. Because you've just had this very strong sense of how things should be. Your heart's constricted. Your heart is no longer soft because they're not doing what you think they should be doing. what would happen if you just let people be who they are without the shoulds? Our hearts start to soften. We just accept what is. They're having a bad day. They don't feel like talking to me. They're not operating at a place. That's fine. It's okay. It's all just okay. To start softening our hearts. So I think in our spiritual world, with looking at our sacred cows, where are our shoulds? Where can we laugh? So I had a recent healing on this, on a much more mundane area, but it was huge. And I didn't even realize how blocked I was around this whole idea of giving and receiving. I get the principles. I like to give, but I never particularly liked receiving. But I had a reason. When I was a kid, I had 2 grandparents on each side, and they would give gifts, and we had to write very serious thank you notes. So I would get $5 or $10, and I had to write, my dad gave me a white page, no pretty colors, no flowers, just a plain white piece of paper. It had my address on top, and I had to fill it with a thank you note. So I had to write what I was thank you for, and then what I was doing, and very formal. But I also had to write a first draft. So I had to write a first draft on a separate piece of paper, give it to him, he would correct it, go through it, and we make all the corrections, and then I'd put it on the white piece of paper. It was a drag. I hated it with all my, I'm like, just don't give me a gift. I just rather not get a gift, because this is no fun. So what happened is I started and this happened through my childhood. You have to write these thank you notes. Oh, it was torture. It took any joy out of receiving, because I knew it was going to follow up with this painful process of writing a thank you note. But what happened is I grew up, I realized I don't like getting thank you notes. I'm just like, oh, this is social obligation. They have to do this. This is formal. So if you give me a thank you note, I'm like, thank you, and I just put it. I don't take it in at all. And and I don't necessarily like writing thank you notes. Well, I'm just doing this because it's expected of me. The whole obligation, the cultural obligation. So on the one hand, our teaching is all about giving and receiving and the joy and the abundance and opulence of giving. And I totally get all that. I just didn't like it very much. And I didn't realize it until, so we have this wonderful spiritual teaching, but that's not what made the inroads. What made the inroads is the Big Bang Theory. If anyone's ever watched that show, has anyone ever watched that show, Big Bang Theory? Most of you have. So there's the character Sheldon, and Sheldon hates getting gifts because of the whole social obligation. Either you have to get him a gift back, or you have to write a note, and he's like, forget it. I don't want to have anything to do with this process. I'll just get myself something if I need it. Leave me alone. They were it was like seeing myself, but it was being made fun of. And I'm laughing at myself through Sheldon, and when you identify with Sheldon, you know you're in trouble. So I'm laughing at this craziness that I realize is in my head. And so it wasn't the spiritual teaching that set me free. It was someone making fun of someone like me who just doesn't want to, no, I don't want to participate. It's all stupid. And so with that shaking up, they call it in the indigenous tribes the shake. They like to shake you up. They like to make you, tease you, loosen you up from your strong beliefs. I have a person that I tithe to. I tithe 10% of gross of everything that I make. And they insist on giving me thank you notes. And I have written them, when I send them the tithe, you do not need to send me a thank you note. I'm good. And they still sent me a thank you note. And I almost was offended by it. I'm like, look, I am giving to you. I'm not so needy that I need to be thanked. Stop already with the thank you notes. You don't need to go through this whole social obligation thing. I'm giving you out of my love. It's pure joy. Just stop with the thank you notes. But they continued to give me thank you notes. They would not listen to me. So after the shake-up with Sheldon, and I'm getting the thank you notes, and this is just recently. I'm sorry I'm such a slow learner. I think that's one of my gifts, is I'm such a slow learner. For everyone, you can all feel good about yourselves because you all learn much faster than I do. I was getting a thank you note, and it just dawned on me, I really liked getting his thank you note. Like, that really feels good. And it went in. It was no longer, I wasn't seeing it as social obligation. Like, I realized they were being persistent with the thank you note because they actually meant it. Like, I felt it in my heart. And I thought, well, maybe that was just a brief moment, a blip. But then the next time they sent me a thank you note, I'm like, no, this really feels good. And it was the first time that I was able to receive and feel the joy of receiving. And I'm like, wow, I had no idea thank you notes could feel so good. I like getting a thank you note. And what happens when we receive? We immediately want to give back. Receiving is so essential to the whole circulation because if we're not receiving, we have nothing to give. And so suddenly I'm like, I think I want to start giving everybody gratitude because this really feels good. So it's my word for next year. 2019, it's all about gratitude because I feel the joy of it. And the great thing when we really felt it, giving and receiving are exactly the same because when we're giving, we're receiving immediately the joy of giving. And when we're receiving, we're giving thanks, and simultaneously we're just so grateful to be receiving. So there's really no separation. It's happening simultaneously, the giving and the receiving. It's so joy. And I just totally got that authentically, getting it. So I was looking at giving and receiving as possible readings for today, and I went right back to, I don't know what I was reading, but it was like, you ethically need to do this. This is the right thing to do. I'm like, no! I get that there's a lot of obligation, and gratitude can look like obligation, writing a thank you note, but now when it's coming from the heart, it's totally different. And so that's what the trickster energy did to me. By joking about it, by making fun of my way of being is what woke me up. All the great spiritual teaching in the world didn't wake me up. It was making fun of it. So my invitation to you is we're going into cultural overload of shoulds with the holiday season. We're starting with Thanksgiving all the way to the end of the year. Should. This is how we should be. This is how we should feel. This is what our family should be doing. This is what everyone should be doing. This is what I should be doing. We're in full of shoulds. Where can you just laugh at it? Where can you laugh at yourself, your shoulds of other people, what they should be doing? Is there a place, first of all, we want to feel deeply, the softening heart. If I really feel authentically, I need to feel something to feel that. But then can I laugh at it? Can I laugh at myself? Can I laugh at my shoulds about other people and my expectations of how they should be behaving, what they should be doing? Because it frees us up. The greatest thing about having a soft heart is it makes life so much more fun. It's not just more love. It's just so much more fun. Now we're not holding all these people to all these standards of what they're supposed to be doing. We're not holding these holidays to these impossible, crazy, I'm supposed to be feeling nothing but unconditional, pure love all of the time. Hell no. Sorry. There's times where people upset me and just like it's okay. I didn't do things, whatever. Just take away the shoulds, laugh at ourselves. So that's the invitation. Soft hearts. Even today, just being with the soft hearts. Paula was leading meditation. It just felt so good. I was just listening to her. I'm like, oh, this feels so good to have her leading meditation. And then the music this morning, and Beth, when you were doing your prayer, I just had to open my arms because I felt like we were inside one another. I'm becoming aware of how deeply connected when I'm let go and just let people inside of me, when I stop resisting, how good it feels to be so deeply connected to every one of you when I allow you in my heart. And that's the receiving, and then ultimately we give right back because it feels so good you can't help it. You have to give it back out. So that's the invitation as we go into our holiday season, as we go into Thanksgiving. And actually tomorrow, is it tomorrow? It's the 20th? The 20th, I believe, is the praise of Muhammad's birth. I wrote all the dates on the calendar. There's a lot of things happening between now and the end of the year. And I believe it starts either tomorrow or the next day. So there's a lot happening in the world around us. Get rid of the shoulds. Enjoy it. Soften your heart. Laugh and cry more than you normally do. Laugh harder, cry harder, and you're going to find life is beautiful, just as it is. And so as we're going to go into our prayer, for those of you who haven't been here, just this month, we're just doing this for this month, in the indigenous world, opening our energy, we're praying collectively, simultaneously, all of us. Now, in the last 2 weeks, I've asked you to stand. Today, I'm going to ask you to sit and stay seated. We're going to pray, and I'm going to ask us to pray simultaneously. What I want us to, if you can, many of you have been in this teaching for so long, you're so used to praying third or first person, which is fine. But if you can, I'm going to ask you to have a conversation with the divine presence within you, the infinite self within you. So it's your finite self, that part of you that has limitations, that does have weaknesses, that has lots of things that you can make fun of. I remember Reverend Michael saying, if you don't think there's anything about you to make fun of, just ask a friend. They'll tell you right away. It's from that place into the perfection of pure spirit. So we're praying, and I want you in this prayer, I'm inviting you to, as we pray out loud, to pray for a soft heart, to pray for your heart to open, to allow yourself to feel deeply, feel your own limitations deeply, feel your own greatness deeply, but not with pride, because you can also laugh at yourself, laugh at your quirks, and laugh at this wonderful holiday time. And in this prayer, as you're feeling this love, this connection, this relationship of love between you and the finite self and the infinite self, or you and God, or you and the divine beloved, or you and life, however you want to word it. Also, I invite you to ask blessings for all our first responders, for all those who have transitioned to the other side, all sentient life forms, animals, plants, and beings. So we hold them in our soft hearts in prayer, and then we're just going to give thanks for this love that is with all of us in our joy and in our tears, and then we'll just let it be.